welcome all. I'm Don Berg. I'm the Executive Director of Deeper Learning Advocates, and my background is that I homeschooled other people's kids for about 5 years. I've worked with children about over 20 years, um, and discovered was doing my own kind of thing using a consensus-run small group, using the community as the primary learning resource. And so it was something different from the mainstream, and I did not know that there were alternatives like that at the time. And then discovered that there was a whole community of people all over the world who did this kind of consensus-based, community-based, child-directed kind of learning. Um, and went, wow, this is great. And so I've eventually went back and got a degree in psychology, and so I've studied it and have been writing books and such ever since. The mission of Deeper Learning Advocates is to ultimately embed the psychology of learning in policy, so policy stops undermining learning. And I've been studying it in depth for a long time and writing books and trying to figure this out. And so what I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story. Um, and then I'm going to go into a handout, which I'll post later, that uh, kind of concisely puts it together in terms of the how we can shift education in terms of freedom. And so it's you'll see it in a little bit. But first, a story. This is called The Art of Marcus. Marcus drew on everything: napkins, worksheets, even his arms. At 8 years old, his sketches of dragons and robots covered every margin of his homework. His art was so good that his mother, Jane, kept a folder labeled Marcus's Masterpieces. Then one Tuesday in October, he stopped. His teacher, Ms. Williams, had implemented a new focus system. No doodling, no choosing seats or partners to work with. Lots of lectures followed by worksheets, one after another. This is how we'll succeed on the state test, she announced. By Thursday, Marcus hadn't drawn a single line. By Friday, couldn't even solve basic math problems he'd previously mastered. One day, Jane found him curled up in his closet, homework crumpled beside him. I'm stupid, he declared. Jane called for an emergency conference. Ms. Williams put Marcus's test scores on the desk. He's falling behind. He won't focus. Jane pulled an even bigger report out of her purse and slammed it on the desk. This is from this pediatrician. Marcus lost 4 pounds in 2 weeks. He's not eating lunch. He complains of stomach aches every morning. What? But that's... Ms. Williams stumbled over her words. Jane held up her hand. Not really. But if you were starving him of food, this school would be shut down in a hot second. And I think you are starving him of something just as essential. The principal, Mr. Torres, had been in the background listening from near the doorway. He'd just returned from a conference on self-determination theory. Miss Williams, I might have something relevant to offer. He steps in between Marcus and Miss Williams and kneels down, saying, Marcus, if you could learn math any way you wanted, how would you do it? Marcus's eyes flickered. Could I draw the problems? Like make the numbers into characters? Show me. So Marcus grabs a pencil. He drew a wizard, 2 goblin warriors, and an orc. The wizard needed 7 more warriors for his army of 10. The math was correct. More importantly, Marcus was smiling. Mr. Torres turned to Ms. Williams. When we took custody of Marcus at 8:15 this morning, we took responsibility for all his needs. Not just keeping him physically safe, but psychologically alive. He needs to make choices, to connect with others, and to feel capable. That's not optional. It's our duty of care. But what about the test scores? Ms. Williams replied. They will improve when Marcus can think clearly again. Just you wait and see. Over the next month, Ms. Williams, reluctantly, let students choose learning partners, pick from different problem-solving methods, and yes, draw in the margins. Test scores rose exactly as predicted, but Mr. Torres found something new to keep on his desk. A new dragon Marcus had drawn, breathing mathematical fire across a worksheet full of correct answers. Below it, Marcus had written, Math Wizard Level Expert. He was so inspired by Marcus' turnaround that he lobbied the district to require all teachers to complete training on psychological needs. They call it the the Marcus Protocol. Because parents watching their child's creativity dry up and blow away is not okay. The end. Now, this story reflects a traditional, not traditional, a mainstream environment. Um, the mainstream environment where test scores are given high prominence. Um, Teacher control is the assumed way things are going to go. Um, it is not the way I ran the programs that I uh, offered. It's a way that doesn't reflect the ideal that I want, but it does reflect that transition from something that is that mainstream way of operating and then shifting into something a little different. So the question, the key thing here is to look at the notion of freedom. This is where what I want to offer is something that looks at freedom from this idea of what Mr. Torres said was thinking about needs altogether. And the crucial thing is that um, we need to look at the way, what I want to think about is the mainstream moving towards something better. So let me get to shift my screen a little bit here. So the image you're seeing there is a diagram of, it's from a book called The Disengaged Teen. It actually just came out last year, late last year. Um, and this is the Winthrop of Anderson and Winthrop, who wrote the book, The Disengaged Teen, is a researcher. Anderson is a writer, Winthrop is a researcher. Um, and this is based on one of their diagrams, but what it's showing is how engagement and motivation combine, and how people actually experience it, how teachers, the thing that Winthrop did in her research was she expanded on existing research that had interviewed teachers about how they experience the engagement of their students. And what she did was she then went and asked the actual students, and basically what came out was everybody experiences the same pattern of how it shows up in the world, in their actual experience. They may have broken it down into more or fewer categories, but basically overall people experience it this way. And what I realized was they didn't have the same labels. So they had, yeah, they didn't have the same labels for it on the outside, but they did. I used their labels on the inside. So resistor, explorer, passenger, achiever are their labels. Um, and so what we're looking at is um, a what self-determination theory is my framework. And so they self-determination theory goes from how do psychological needs work, and then what they found is that psychological needs actually shift or determine how motivation shows up, and then motivation influences how engaged someone is. Now, it's not a perfect linear relationship. There's a lot of interaction, but the idea is there's certain kinds of motivation that are have positive effects on well-being. There are certain types of motivation that have negative effects on well-being, and that's what the top of this is. Is if you look at the small, it says controlled motivations, autonomous motivations. Autonomous motivations are all the ones that have positive effects on well-being. Controlled motivations have neutral to negative effects, mostly negative. There is a sliver of a certain type that may be neutral. Um, and so that shows up in experience as, the people who are owning their own goal, that's the positive part of it. That's why they're called autonomous, is the self, who you are, you're owning the goals, you're owning the uh, the pursuit of whatever this activity entails. So, but that can happen in different ways depending on your level of investment. So the explorer is what we want. That's what I would contend is the educative portion of this, the most educative. Um, if you're in the explorer mode, you're getting maximum value out of whatever situation you're in. You're really learning from it. Um, but sometimes what happens is um, there might be something in the environment that doesn't meet your needs as well as it could. And so you downshift and you just become what they call achiever, what I call faux achiever in my books, um, is that instead of fully uh, engaging with the environment, you're kind of holding back a little bit. Um, you're still gonna I was an achiever in school. I wasn't an explorer. I was sometimes rarely an explorer, but mostly I was an achiever. I got, well, I didn't get great grades, but I knew how to work the system enough to get decent grades and enough to get me into an elite college. Um, so for me, that's my main experience of the mainstream. And my schooling was entirely mainstream, public schools in California, in the USA. And so achiever mode is what I'm very used to. Now, if it if you stop owning the goals even of say, you don't even accept this environment as a legitimate kind of thing, then you may switch over to passenger mode. Now, passenger mode is the one where you're just kind of going along. You may still do the activities, but you're really not you're doing it for external reasons. That's why the motivations are called controlled, is it's their goal, but here I am, I have to deal with it, and you just go along and you don't create any conflict or generate resistance to what's going on, which is that final category. Is if you really get invested in your own needs and they're not providing support for it, then you become a resistor. And that's the thing that is classically portrayed in Hollywood. Every uh, teacher savior movie, Stand and Deliver, Freedom Riders, there's a whole bunch of them. Um, they show the kids who are, leaning back. It's usually a high school, not always, but usually a high school, and they're rough and tumble, streetwise kids who are not putting up with the teacher's BS. Um, that's the resistor mode. So that's where those are the people, and it's true that they disrupt everything for everybody. They make it really hard to do the job of a teacher, mainstream or not. If you have resistors, you've got a challenge on your hands. Um, and so this is how people actually experience these things. This is the way that both teachers and students describe what they see in classrooms on a day-to-day basis. So this is actually how um, what I know as self-determination theory, the scientific theory of how that all works, actually looks for real people in real situations. So it's really helpful to look at that and understand what's going on. Now, this is one of Winthrop's actual studies from one of her papers, and it shows the typical patterns for elementary school kids and high school kids. Doesn't show the middle because it's just in between those, so it's not very helpful. But the main thing to notice is where I've pointed out that 30% are disengaged, even for children, and 5% are resisting. So that's a typical pattern. Or what I expect to be a typical pattern. I have no reason to believe it's massively different in any other mainstream schools. Now, culture makes a big difference. School culture, but also the culture broadly. So this is, I believe, American schools. It might be different slightly in other uh, countries or other cultural contexts. But in the American schools, this is what I expect. And I expect this is probably not radically different from mainstream schools in most countries. There may be variations in the percentages, but I expect there's, not radical differences. Now, anyway, but the key thing to note here is the shift from 30% being disengaged, the gray box down here. You can see my cursor, right? Yeah, okay. So that 30% and then shifting to 65%. So all the increase is in the ones we do not want. And it's all decrease in the ones that are actually favorable. So this is the disengagement pattern that people observe. And essentially, even if you're a mainstream teacher, the job just if you're in a mainstream school, you know, if you were to follow your kids through, it would make it more difficult, not less difficult. Um, so the story that I told was to illustrate a child going from someone who, you know, it wasn't portrayed as to how he related to school in the previous thing, but the indicator is his art and his ability to express himself gets shut down. So that means he's making a transition. He's crossing this line from if he was an achiever, he shifted into passenger and and got shut down because his creativity was, as I said, drying up. So the story is just an encapsulation, a creative way of saying, you know, that's not a desirable outcome, and we need to do something about that. And then having the principal come in and do something to shift that. It's not a realistic story in the sense of it would all just magically shift in months or or whatever, you know, within a weeks or a months. Um, but it's just to illustrate that transition and then come out of it. Okay. Uh, any questions or comments on the disengagement piece?
Yes.
Go for it.
Um, can you pull up the first slide, please?
Sure.
I didn't quite understand. The x-axis is about motivation, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yes.
And the y-axis is about engagement.
Correct.
Why are these two different dimensions?
Ah,
I would have thought that engagement is not independent of motivation. I don't quite get it.
right. So I wouldn't say they're dimensions. They're the ways that people think about it. And uh, so in order to observe it, um, the question is, you know, if you're to categorize somebody's behavior, you would look at these two aspects of what's going on. Are they truly the agentic engagement is how you put yourself into a situation. And and so there's basically two ways that happens. You're either going with the program or you're going against the program. So that's why you have these two different modes. So it's not dimensions in the sense that this is continuous. It's like these are distinct ways that people operate and have been their own experience of being in the environment matches these categories. It's not just like, yeah. Um,
And maybe explain to me the behavioral.
so
What's it?
behavioral engagement is you may be going like a passenger, you may be going along with the program in the sense of doing stuff, but you're not investing yourself in it. You're just, okay, you know, do the
Okay,
thing, I'll do the thing, no problem. You're just doing the behaviors. You're not actually investing your emotions and your cognition in fully to get more out of it. You're just, it's minimal. This is
okay,
minimal, maximal, uh,
okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Richard, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, thanks, Don. I put in chat a link to Joe Symes' talk that she gave at an Aero conference.
Nice.
What she has to say there very much is along the lines of what your story was
Ah,
at the
uh-huh.
beginning. And so people might find that that's useful in talking to parents and
Mm-hmm.
trying to get minds changed. And then also with your next slide where you showed the Explorer being down to 5%
Mm-hmm.
with the older students, there is research that shows that creativity diminishes the longer students are in school. And I don't know if you've seen that study out. I'm just looking for it, and if I find it, I'll put it in chat.
Yeah, yeah, I'm familiar with that research. Um, one thing about the creativity thing is that there's different types of creativity, and there's a certain there's questions about that research in terms of what it's actually uh, measuring. So is it actually measuring creativity in the sense of merely being original? Because you can expect children, the younger they are, to be very original because they don't have any of the constraints that actually um, they don't have social constraints, they don't have various kinds of constraints that actually make something relevant to a particular thing. So they will do seemingly random stuff, and that counts as a certain type of creativity. But creativity that matters, the creativity that we want in any given field, is creativity that's contextually relevant. um, and so there's a question of whether that research is actually just measuring a diminishment or the rise of their ability to recognize more of the context and what matters, or are they, so are they maturing into something that is a good thing to mature into, or are they losing creativity in the artistic, creative, relevant sense that we mean it? And so that's a question about that research. I don't have an answer. I don't necessarily come down one way or the other on it. Um, but but one of the ways we study creativity has been studied is particularly Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who's famous for flow research. Um, he looked at what he called capital C creativity, where um, one of the properties of that, making a true contribution to your field, and really like the Einsteins and the Marie Curies and Picassos and Van Goghs and people at the top, is you actually have to understand the field in order to make a meaningful alteration to it, a meaningful, helpful contribution to it. And so that's one of the things they found, is that the creativity that we really want and that matters the most is not what children are actually good at, because they don't have enough embedding in the a field or a way. Now, it doesn't mean that children can't make any meaningful, good contributions. It just means that it's a question with that research as to whether what they're losing is good or bad or indifferent. Anyway, thank you for
I
that.
think you're right to draw those distinctions. I found what I was trying to remember. It's the NASA study that showed that 98%
Mm,
of children are creative geniuses before they go to school, and then it drops down to something like that 5% that you
right,
were
right,
showing. And I found the link to that study if I put it in chat if people are
great.
interested. It's just actually it's not the study, it's just a quick video
Video about it.
of
Yeah,
about it, and people can see from there if they want to read it.
yeah, yeah. Very cool. Yeah, no, that's I appreciate that there's concerns there, but there's also, because since my field being psychology, I have looked at a lot of those things and find that there are nuances that sometimes get lost in our ways of talking about school and criticizing school. And I think some of those nuances are actually really uh, interesting to explore and figure out. Because I think that yeah, we we can get into a more ideological position that we hold, rather than a thoroughly thought through consideration of what would make things better. So, okay, so I'm posting a PDF. Essentially, what you'll see is the what's behind this Freedom in School um, is what you're going to see in the handout. Um, so the question is, what role should freedom play in the school? Um, and we're just going to go through, so you don't have to pull it up, but I'm pretty much going to go through some key points. I'm not going to go through the entire thing because there's obviously a lot of words there. But I want to set this context for how we understand freedom and what role it should be. So first of all, this preamble starts with this idea of no reasonable parent would send their child to a school that recklessly suffocates, starves, dehydrates, or exposes their students to the elements. Like, those are fundamental needs. Those are things that will threaten their life if they were to happen. So no reasonable parent would accept a school that does that. Now, policies and practices that put them in that situation. So So not just a teacher behaving irresponsibly, but if the school had policies and practices that created those situations, that's a bad thing. It's immoral, but it also would undermine education. It undermines the educative process, which we'll clarify that in a little bit. And then, of course, the mainstream operates in a way that is a consequence of accidents of history, cultural delusions, and bureaucratic inertia. Um, because they don't create the situations of suffocation, starvation, dehydration, or exposure to the elements, but they do create situations that undermine sleep, which we know is a fundamental need, and also the needs identified by self-determination theory, uh, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Um, and so needs are important to how freedom works and how we understand freedom. So the first piece, a person is free when their needs are fully satisfied, or they have everything necessary to actively pursue need satisfaction. And around free, uh, so that is what being free means. And the 1.2 at the bottom there, children pursue, establish, maintain, or express their freedom by playing. So playing has to be part of how children are free. Um, and then the second point is that this implies that schools are only fulfilling their educative purpose when both playfulness and professionalism coexist. So one of the things about schools is that schools tend to operate on the assumption that the teacher's professionalism requires them to impose academic rigor and to have things be a certain way to be more academically productive or more intellectually rigorous. And that seems to create a contradiction between the playfulness children have and the professionalism that teachers are expected to profess. But here, what I'm saying is uh, that a child's psychological needs, if they're thwarted or neglected, they will be less playful. That undermines the educative purpose. Now, in 2.1, it said, I didn't highlight it in this one, but in 2.1, you can see above there in gray, an educated person is someone who perceives accurately, thinks clearly, and acts effectively on self-selected goals and aspirations that are appropriate to their situation without consciously aware that any of those things are happening. So being an educated person is something that has these psychological properties: accurate perception, clear thinking, acting effectively. But on what? And that's self-selected goals and aspirations. That doesn't mean that others don't have any effect on it, don't have any influence on it, but the self ultimately selects the goals and aspirations. That's why in the engagement motivation interaction, the self is selecting the goal. You may be in a context in which there's a teacher who says this is the goal, but you may have your own goal and your needs are going to be part of that, whether you are aware of it or not. And so that's why you get the passenger and resistor modes, is if the kids tune out of the teacher's goals and tune into their own inclinations, which are going to include autonomy and relatedness and competence, they're going to go in that direction. So it ends up creating a challenging situation when they go in that direction that's not the same as the teacher and the people who want to go where the teacher's taking them. So what we can recognize here is playfulness is part of how that happens. When kids are in that uh, explorer mode, playfulness is the result. Now, for adults, let me continue on here. Student achieves educative outcomes only when psychological needs are satisfied. However, those needs are satisfied, they can achieve educative outcomes. But the needs include autonomy, competence, and relatedness from self-determination theory. It has to include those things, which when you put those together, you get in children playfulness. And what I would argue is the next one: a teacher only achieves professional grade behavior when the bulk of their actions are supportive of the needs of their students, colleagues, and themselves. So the teacher has a professional responsibility, if you're teaching children, to generate playfulness in your students, but you also have to generate a type of professionalism that is need supportive in that environment, because then you're bringing everyone into that space of freedom. Because where your needs are fully satisfied, you're free. Okay. And then finally, a school, well, not finally, but the school itself can only achieve its education. And I take school to be fundamentally educative by definition. If it is not educative, it should not be considered a school. So that's something. I have some folks who uh, take school, define school in ways that would, uh, in terms of current practices that may be undermining children's rights and freedoms and needs. And that doesn't make sense to me. You have to define school with an educative at the center, because otherwise it's not a school. And so school, when something is called school, but it undermines needs, then it's actually undermining its own educative purpose. And so the psychological needs of both students and teachers have to be supported in order for the educative purpose to be thing. Now, this is to me the simply logical consequence of discovering that the needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness are fundamental to human well-being. Like, this is just a logical entailment of that. It's not something you could, so, okay. Um, and then now finally, the there are multiple purposes that schools serve. And one of the purposes that it serves is it's essentially childcare. Um, Parents are working in many societies, and so school is the place for the kids while the parents are doing something else. Even if they are taken to have a duty of educating, before they can educate, they have to fulfill a basic duty of care. In common law societies, it's called in loco parentis is the term. Um, the school has any institution that takes custody of a child has to act in loco parentis. They have to take this duty of care for their most basic well-being. And so before you can serve an educative purpose, you have to be fulfilling this basic, more fundamental duty to provide for the well-being and mental well-being in particular of children and their teachers. So this is the final piece of the handout is we have to review what's going on in schools, how we govern schools, to think about freedom and as the consequence of psychological well-being. Um, so and not just schools, but any institution that takes control of a child needs to be thought through in this way. Is say, if they have custody of a child, are they operating in a way, are they governing as a school community in a way that actually uh, supports and takes that duty of care seriously? And in a sense, before they can do whatever nominal named purpose they have. So a gymnastics program takes a child in for some period of time, but if they're not doing the basic things to take care of their well-being, they shouldn't be moving on to that other thing. They need to be doing this more fundamental piece, this duty of care that parents all have inherently, and that when they entrust their child to somebody else, that somebody else takes on some minimal level of this care. And in legal circles, it's known as in loco parentis. Okay, so that's the whole thing. It's in the chat. That's the whole presentation. We can now discuss freely.